Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 48 of What to Think, VentureBeat's weekly technology podcast. I'm Mark Sullivan.
And I'm Jordan Ovett, another writer.
And this week we talked to Elena Donio, president of Concur. Concur makes the leading travel and expense management solution in the world, and the company was purchased last year by SAP. We talked to her about that. But first, we're going to talk about some of the leading technology stories that happened in the past week. Facebook had its big event, the F8 conference, just last week, and they announced a ton of stuff. They announced their messenger platform, finally, and there's another thing called Parse, which is an SDK for the Internet of Things. What about that, Jordan?
Parse is a mobile backend that you can use to develop and deploy mobile apps. And so Parse announced software development kits, SDKs, that will let developers more easily incorporate data into their apps. And actually, it's good timing for them because just last night, IBM came out of nowhere and said that it was forming a new business unit around the Internet of Things and was announcing new tools to help developers basically do something similar for their apps. So Facebook's Parse actually beat IBM to this sort of announcement. It's pretty interesting.
Cool. I mean, just as a user, how's this going to impact me that developers can build this stuff into their apps?
Well, you can have cooler apps that take into consideration maybe your wearables, like a Fitbit, or perhaps a connected drum kit. And it will keep track of all the times that you hit that snare drum. Well, I don't know if that's actually a real thing. I wouldn't be surprised if it is. There's all kinds of wearables and other gadgets, but also for kind of the business context, there are more devices that are generating data through sensors that are in complicated industrial systems.
Right.
And that sort of data could help businesses presumably have apps that are for their employees or even for end users, for customers that are more so-called smart.
Cool. Aside from that, they also announced an analytics platform for app developers where developers can find out all sorts of things about the performance of their apps, who's using the apps, where they're coming from, where they're finding the apps. And this is a pretty huge thing because it puts Facebook in competition with some other big players, and it could really attract more developers to the platform.
Potentially. There was a bunch of other developer stuff. They demonstrated some new deep learning capabilities that they had with text and with videos. And they have 600 million monthly active users on Messenger, by the way. They just basically showed that people are using these apps, and it's a huge opportunity for developers. They're trying to make it easier with a bunch of tools. Parse actually got a debugging tool. There was so much basically that Facebook did that showed developers need to be around that.
Yeah. Finally, there was the whole thing about e-tailers where you can use the Facebook Messenger to communicate with, like place an order with an online retailer. And then you could jump on the Messenger platform and change the order or talk with the retailer. And which basically what Facebook did was replace the chat functionality that you find on e-commerce sites everywhere. So
I'm going to actually stop here and tell you what to think.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you that that's a stupid idea. I really don't want to have all my emails or things that I would be normally doing in email, like tracking a package, happening inside of a chat app. That's not why I go to a chat app. I want to go to a chat app to talk to my best friends. And I don't want to have it be polluted by business stuff. So that's what I'm telling you what to think. All
right, I'll think that. You know, it kind of depends on how the app is designed. I mean, maybe they can create a firewall between those two things that make it easier to use.
Maybe. I don't want it.
Okay. That's fine. I don't either. There's another story this week that was pretty interesting. As expected, there's leaks starting to come out about the iPhone 6S and the iPhone 6S Plus and the iPhone 6C. And the leak that came out was a picture of the plastic backing. So like the 5C had it wasn't metal on the back. It was plastic. And so what people are thinking now is that the 6 is going to get that same treatment. But what also we're hearing about is the return to a smaller iPhone.
I kind of like that. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it's interesting because you still see a ton of iPhone 4 series and iPhone 5 series out in the wild. And I think there's something to that size. Whether Apple knew it or not, they may have hit upon something at that point of the evolution of the iPhone. So there's a chance now that they'll make an iPhone 6 at that size. Would you buy that?
I would. I saw when Apple came out with the much bigger ones, and I thought, that's too big for me. First, it's going to stick out too wide in my pocket and too long. But also, I just worry that everything will fit in my hand. I know you can hit that button and make everything kind of collapse and shrink, so it's easier to push buttons on it.
Yeah.
But I would prefer a smaller thing. I know that people who love to watch movies and stuff might want the larger screens, but I personally am fine with the smaller one.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way, and that's what they should think.
Cool.
And finally today, Microsoft had some pretty big news today with the announcement of the Surface 3, which it runs the full Windows 8.1 operating system. This is a machine that sells for $500 without LTE and $600 with LTE, and it's kind of aimed at the consumer market, meaning that this is Microsoft putting out a tablet computer or a convertible that runs a very powerful operating system, then it's going straight head-to-head with the iPad.
And I think the other thing to note that our writer Emil made a big point about is, why didn't it have Windows RT? I remember when that thing was pervasive. It's not anymore. Mm-hmm. And basically, Emil came out with a very clear story today saying Windows RT is dead.
Yeah.
And this is the bigger turning point, that people are not any longer going to be booting up that operating system on Windows devices.
Well, it was a weaker operating system than the version they have now, than 8.1. So it might, just in terms of making things simpler for the whole ecosystem, it might be a blessing that it seems to be going away. So
and moving eventually toward Windows 10, which is going to be announced or released fully for everyone with Spartan and all that other good stuff this summer.
Yeah,
I'm psyched.
I am too. That's what people should think. The level of integration between that OS and mobile devices, I think some of the things they've done there are truly exciting. So we need to give Microsoft a chance on this one. That's the major news stories of the day. The What to Think podcast is brought to you from the San Francisco headquarters of our host and sponsor, New Relic, which helps customers make sense of billions of data points about millions of applications in real time. More than 250,000 users leveraged New Relic's comprehensive cloud-based solution to analyze more than 690 billion data points per day across more than 4 million application instances. When your brand and customer experience depend on performance of modern software, New Relic provides powerful insight into your overall environment, from the web to native mobile apps and more. Learn more at newrelic.com. Welcome to the guest segment of the podcast. This week we have Elena Donio, who is president of Concur, which was acquired by SAP last year. Welcome to the podcast, Elena.
Thank you so much.
Last week we saw a very big story about women in the workplace and equality in the workplace with the Ellen Pao trial. As everyone saw, she lost the case against Kleiner Perkins, a very high-profile VC. But what did happen was it got the conversation going about the role of women in the workplace. And I wonder if you just have some general thoughts about that, some general reactions to that news.
I think the most positive thing that's come out of that case is exactly what you said, that the dialogue is reinvigorated, it's reignited, and the conversation at the cocktail party is turning in that direction. I think that's always a good thing. My experience has been really different than hers. I have worked for a company for the last 17 years where I have felt unbelievably supported. And the largest thing standing in my way as a woman in leadership and technology has been less about the place and the capacity to do really good work and the capacity to grow to the top, and more about how to do it and have the kind of life that I wanted.
Mm-hmm. Were you ever involved in trying to raise venture capital for Concur?
I was actually. Well, not for Concur, for Seven Software, which was the startup that Concur acquired back in the day.
What year was that?
1998.
I think back then there was much greater challenges when it comes to equality, gender equality specifically, in venture capital and tech generally as well. I don't know if that's true. I wasn't around. But I just wonder if you can tell me about how things have changed and what your experiences were back then and how that might be different now. Yeah,
I was fortunate to have started my career in consulting at a time when there were a very small handful of female partners that were kind of trying to help break through some boundaries and show the way. But we hadn't yet figured out as an industry how to do the work in a way that made sense. There was a ton of travel related with the work. There was these 6-month, 12-month, 36-month out-of-town assignments that really weren't conducive to having any kind of family or deep personal relationships for that matter. And so when I went to a startup, it was really to recast the rest of my future in a way that I felt I could have more control over that, to be really engaged professionally, but to also be really engaged in my personal life, and to start building that sense of family and community that I felt like I was missing on the road. I went to a startup that was actually founded by a woman. And within 6 months, we sold to Concur. During the process of starting up that startup over that first 6-month period, we did pitch to quite a few VCs. We actually didn't get any capital. And I don't think I pitched to a single woman. I don't know that that's noteworthy. I think that's just sort of how it was. And I'm not necessarily sure that had anything to do with why we didn't get funding. We probably didn't get funding because we were really small in a super hot competitive field. It was in the e-procurement space. So we sold to Concur really quickly, went public, and then had the first major career pivot after that, which was we shut that product down within a year. So we've been able to grow from there.
Was that acquisition mainly about the people, or were they able to take the intellectual property and build it into their product?
The idea was to build the intellectual property into their product. We were a very small team, and the vision at the time was to have this employee desktop of solutions that provided a front end to really complicated and inefficient back office processes. So travel and expense, which is now what we're known for at Concur, and e-procurement, and then employee self-service. So we acquired into those two other spaces and ultimately created this employee desktop product and vision. Unfortunately, that was at a time when then the capital markets started to dry up. We weren't yet profitable and had to go through the really hard process of jettisoning some of those solutions so that we could focus on what we did best, and that was T&E.
Well, it seems to have worked. You've been with Concur through a lot of changes with the product. I mean, it used to be a software product at one time sold on floppy disks. And
remember
Egghead? Really? Yeah.
Wow. Remember Egghead software? That's where it was sold. In a box.
Yeah. And so, and then it went to a more client-server model, and then finally to the cloud. What I'm going for here is I wonder if you could share with us some of the things that are being discussed about where this software is going, what it might look like in 5 years' time.
Those are all the pivots that we've gone through. And I think we're in the midst of another major pivot now. And it's about making sure that the ecosystem isn't insular. It's not just what Concur offers to our clients. It's about all of the things that sit in the travel and expense ecosystem, and things that aren't necessarily provided by us. They're provided by new developers, they're provided by partners, and creating a network effect so that our clients, and equally importantly, their users, the end travelers that are experiencing this software on a day-to-day basis, are getting everything they need to get closer and closer to a vision that we affectionately call the perfect trip, so that all those things that make your travel experience a little bit still lousy from time to time, that we're chipping off on those every single day. And so that means there's new capabilities coming all the time. We're now connected to Uber. We're now connected to Starbucks, so that if those are things that you use routinely on your trip, which we know they are things that are used routinely because we've got the big data to tell us that anytime you use those two solutions, the information gets back into your expense report automatically. You have nothing to do. That's a little taste of the kinds of things that we're doing.
So it's just about removing friction points, right? And connecting with companies like Uber that might end up on an expense report.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just wonder if you guys are going to be able to release software as frequently now that you're inside of SAP as you were before.
SAP is known as this unbelievably large and powerful company in the enterprise space. They sell on-premise software, but they've also made a hard push into the cloud over the last few years. And the message that we get internally quite regularly is a very nice one, and it's about how Concur has something to offer to SAP as a whole, and how when we think about speed and we think about innovation and we think about things like the end user and the end user's life and making sure that that's on the forefront of what we do, we feel really heard inside SAP. And so when you think about, well, what does it mean to really take that to the next level, it's about, are we getting the investment to keep doing what we're doing? And the answer is yes. There's more investment coming. There's more innovation coming. And our technology platform remains core to Concur. And it's not something that we've had to sort of hand over the keys to.
So are you saying that, yes, you can ship software way faster than SAP? Is that what you're saying?
I actually don't know what their release process is, and maybe I should know that. But we release software at least monthly, and we have no plan to stop doing that.
And in terms of partnering, I just wonder if you are seeing more usage of younger, earlier stage, venture-backed, privately held companies like Expensify, namely, showing up and people using it on their phones and actually having experiences that are approaching that seamlessness that you were talking about. I think about my experience with Expensify for the past 2+ years, and I absolutely think it's fine. And I know a lot of other people who have that as the standard. I don't know if that's just the Bay Area bubble I'm operating inside of, and I know nothing about companies that have more than 2,000 employees, but my sense is it's become something that is popular, I could say.
I think that discoverability by the end user is actually the direction that will continue to go. And I think that a lot of enterprise software is taking those lessons on board and saying, if my end user has a problem to solve, what responsibility do I have to accept that and to make sure that they're supported inside the four walls of the company landscape? And so we do see an awful lot of new solutions and apps coming in the door that way. We've funded through our Perfect Trip Fund organizations that are creating software that are great for the end user and great for the company. And ultimately, some of those are discovered online. And yeah, I think there's absolutely a trend around making sure that the end user is in the forefront. We don't see Expensify all that often competitively. We tend to sell to organizations with, I'd say, between 20 and hundreds of thousands of users.
Sure.
And when they're at that point where they're making a decision on behalf of the company and they want something that ties together all of the employees and their processes and procedures associated with that, the payment vehicles, et cetera, we tend to do really well in that landscape.
Expensify then is sort of toward the bottom of that tier, like when we're talking about small and medium-sized businesses. Is that how it lays out?
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, we don't see them super often and competitively, but I think that when you think about something that's discoverable at that level, it typically gets hold and gets planted inside the corporation when the company's relatively small today.
SAP is a very big company. In terms of the culture of Concur, and maybe specific to women inside that culture, what are some of the challenges involved with restoring or keeping the parts of the culture that were good?
We think about that a lot. And Concur was on this huge growth trajectory before. So we've grown from, 3,000 employees just 2 years ago to almost 5,000 now. So we were already starting to butt up against how do you hold on to the elements of your culture that you love, but grow up at the same time. And so we look at it and say, we all love what we do. We're a super transparent, open, and accountable culture. Those are things that you can hold on to while you actually grow and get better. So things that we didn't do super well are things like we didn't have a hardcore initiative around corporate social responsibility. We didn't have a head of diversity. Those are areas where you can say, growth is good because we get to invest in these things now that help us make the place we work a better place. And I think that's really core to the conversation is how do you deliver technology? How do you delight the customer? But how do you hold on to building the place that people really want to work and call home? So we've been talking a lot about that over the last couple of years, even before the acquisition by SAP. And so now we sort of have to double down on that and say, okay, what things can we take off the shelf that are really great culturally, but how do we maintain that sense of speed and innovation that we talked about earlier? And I think by continuing to have the ability to set the agenda, by having our own set of metrics and goals that we're measured by, those are sort of some of the fundamentals that help us keep our guiding light the same as it's been. But there's also things like SAP has this amazing program around social sabbaticals. I can name 100 people at Concur that would sign up for those tomorrow.
What is it? Can you talk about it?
It's a program where they sponsor you to go and do philanthropic work globally.
We want to tell our CEO about this.
Sounds like a good idea.
You and me both.
Yeah.
I also wonder about VC within SAP. They have a corp dev section, or I should say a venture capital arm. It's called Sapphire Ventures, and before it was called SAP Ventures. And I've written a good bit about these types of programs within tech companies and how they're becoming more and more prominent in terms of the venture capital landscape. And I just wonder if you have had any opportunity to talk with those people and engage and say, hey, you need to be getting the money into travel startups. and perhaps have some kind of connection with these startups that are creating those next generation experiences in a way that the fund that you mentioned before isn't quite as prominent as that firm.
One of the things that's exciting for us is the fact that we have access to those kinds of conversations while we're also continuing to invest in our own fund inside Concur. I was just talking to Concur CEO and the head of the SAP Business Network about this. Our CEO is Steve Singh, and he is a huge part of, I think, pushing these kinds of balls forward inside SAP. And we were talking about exactly that is there an opportunity to use the balance sheet to invest more in travel technology, in the travel landscape, in apps that help employees who are on the road, even if they're not sort of bespoke travel apps, but help people while they're on the road? And we think the answer to that is a resounding yes. So we're continuing to invest in our own fund, our Perfect Trip Fund, and in new development. And we're talking about ways to even beef that up. But we look forward to the conversations with SAP more broadly about how we're utilizing the venture capacity there to continue to invest in this area. I think you'll see it not just in travel and expense that I'm talking about, but also across the concept of the business network inside SAP, which includes Ariba and Fieldglass, two organizations that also have deep connections to an ecosystem of suppliers and applications and services.
I mean, we see companies like Facebook, for instance, that turn into platforms where you can acquire apps. Has there been any thought given to that model within your company, Concur, or within SAP?
I wouldn't say that we're interested in turning into a platform. I would say that having a platform is a very important part of our future. Thinking about the fact that the sweet idea in this landscape isn't really all that relevant. There are certain things that we're really good at that we'll continue to do and we'll continue to invest in. But travel is inherently social. You're interacting with tens of vendors while you're on the road. And every single one of those interactions is an opportunity for a better experience. It's not great yet. And so everything from the supply community to the developer community has a lot to do with what our platform looks like and how it grows and evolves over the next couple of years. I wouldn't say that that's the end game. I would say we'll still build great software inside Concur, but we'll build it with a bespoke connectivity capability so that we can continue to extend it out.
As sort of a final question here, I liked very much something that I think you say when you speak about showing up in full color, multidimensional, in HD. What exactly do you mean by that?
My philosophy is that when we invite people to show up at work completely authentically with everything that they are, whether they're a parent or an athlete or a philanthropist or a writer or a musician, that they do their best work when they come in the door. That's one of the things I think I've learned on this journey is that the place that we're trying to build is the place that really celebrates that says we want all of you, because when we have all of you, you bring your best ideas in. You know, how many times have you gotten an amazing idea while you were sitting at your desk? You're probably kind of rare if you have. Everybody will say, no, I got it on the trail this morning, or I got it while I was playing guitar.
Yeah. Not I was out in the bathroom, in the shower.
Well, it's in the shower. It's in the shower.
We should all shower for sure.
So you're saying be real and don't act like you don't have any personal life?
Tell your stories about your personal life. In fact, be vocal about them, because
even if they're very dirty. I mean, what do you mean? I'm not sure where you draw the line.
Not so much dirty. I mean the fact that it's okay to talk about your kids, it's okay to talk about your pet, and it's okay to talk about the gig that you did last night. Because when you do that, and particularly in my role and in leadership roles, when you do that, you invite a conversation about the fact that it's okay to be multidimensional. And I think seeing that makes people feel like you're more accessible and that it can be done, and that it can be done in a way that has you not sacrifice the things you believe in outside of the work that you do.
You know, the best managers I've had were people that were able to understand me and know me enough to utilize the best things in me, you know, and do it in a workplace. So are you saying that it's good to create an environment where people feel comfortable exposing those things?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Just not too much.
Well,
in your case.
Know where those lines are.
Yeah.
That's difficult, actually. You want people to be open, but not too open. Don't share those things. You can share everything else.
Well, don't be super distracting, but be who you are. You know, I think it's funny when people say, well, that guy's a totally different person outside of work. Well, then I kind of think he's in the wrong place.
I think a lot of people are like that. There's this idea that you kind of like assume this character when you go to work.
That's right.
So
did that character change for you when you joined SAP?
No, I think I'm supposed to show up even more who I am, because I think that's how we drive change.
I think that's great.
Well, Elaine, it's been a pleasure talking to you and a pleasure learning about your company and your transition over to SAP. And it sounds like things are going really well. So thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks so much. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining us on What to Think, VentureBeat's technology news podcast. As always, you can find us online at venturebeat.com. And if you haven't subscribed to our podcast in iTunes yet, please do so. Just search for What to Think on iTunes.
And we're also on SoundCloud.
And on SoundCloud. We'll see you next time.
Bye.